System riding to the core. Yeah. Reppin' Inner City Left.
This is the Inner City Left broadcast. Today is Tuesday, September 30th. I'm Amin TMK alongside Moshe Little Tanky Sumler. Moshe, hello. Happy Tuesday. It's going up on a Tuesday. I love my Conan reference. How are you? Everything's good?
Man, as good as it gets, you know what I'm saying? I mean,
As good as it gets. Oh, you living good, man. Let me hold some.
No. See, that's a phrase that covers a lot of ground. Isn't it?
Oh, as good as
it
it
ain't
gets.
gonna get no better. Is more what I mean to say. I mean, I'm sure it's quite a bit better for many.
Here's the thing. Here's the good news. At least it's gonna get worse.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
It's
exactly.
As good as it gets.
There it is. You're right. As good as it gets. From the circumstances. There's this takeover now. It just seems imminent or already happened for the United States to just kind of take all of Europe as a proxy. Every little country, every little state, every corridor, every area. That's what they're trying to do. There's a country that's been at the I don't want to say the forefront, but kind of the third country, maybe fourth next to Belarus. But that would be Moldova. Now, Moldova is interesting because they have an area that is claimed independence called Transnistria. Okay, so you knew that was something that's been also kind of an underlying issue here. So I say all that to say, check it out. I want you to check this out. All right. This is Maya Sandu, Moldova's pro-Western president, cements power after the party she funded wins election. What's your feelings on this? What's your thoughts on this? This has sort of been something that we talked about with Georgia and other countries, sort of always these two candidates, and one seems to be the Western puppet. What do we know about her? What do we know about this?
Yeah, I mean, the only country I would say that's also entangled in this that you missed is Romania, right? So we've had Georgia with the fake elections, and then, and they say the Russian back, but really what they mean is the nationalist Georgian, right? The guy that's like not in the pocket of the EU project, right? Not necessarily, I mean, Georgia has its own issues to work out with Russia. And, again, that's family business. I leave that to them. It was part of the Soviet Union for a good while. Moldova was like that. They weren't part of the Soviet Union per se, but they were definitely under the Iron Curtain, which was like the NATO equivalent for the USSR. It was nations that were in NATO in Europe, and there were nations that were in the Iron Curtain. Ironically, Poland was in the Iron Curtain as well. And all of the little Baltic countries, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, they were part of USSR proper. So again, it just goes to show you how far the NATO project has poached into what's been traditionally considered Eastern Europe or Russian aligned Europe, And Moldova is just the latest case of that. Again, we got a woman who won with something like a dubious 51%, but the early readings when they were just getting all of the election ballots from, Moldova, she was getting destroyed by the opposition candidate. Then all of a sudden, all of the expat votes come in, just in time, and when I say expats, I mean Moldovans that choose not to live in Moldova, but somehow still want to have a vote in Moldova, kind of decide, So put it like this. They've been taking ballots from Moldovans and, all across Europe, There were 3 different polling stations for Moldovans that happen to be living in Italy, for example, right? But only one in Russia. Even though there are more than 100,000 ethnic Moldovans that, for whatever reason, are living in Russia, they were only allowed one polling place. But Italy, which has less than 20,000 Moldovans, to the best of my understanding, right, has 3. So it was very obvious who they wanted to vote and who they didn't want to vote. And that was essentially Moldovans that are in England, Moldovans that are in France, and they turned the tide, man. They turned the tide with all of the expat votes, all of those Moldovans that are living abroad, they were able to just squeak in the Western candidate at 51 point odd percent, the person that's going to allow Moldova to have a tighter relationship with the EU and ostensibly NATO. This is the exact same playbook that they did in Romania. They tried to do it, as you mentioned, in Belarus. It failed. They got a little bit closer to success in Georgia, but ultimately it failed as well. And it's been out and out. I mean, the guy that makes Telegram has out and out said the French were interested in subverting. He strongly insinuates the French government and French intelligence was trying to subvert this vote, and that there would be good things in it for him. You know what I'm saying? If he helped them a little bit, But again, he's a tricky guy. The guy that created Telegram, he is ethnically Russian, but he's a billionaire, right? Or 100 millionaire, very expensive, wealthy person who flies around, and But that was just an interesting story that he told, So. It goes on, man. And he said straight up that they wanted to open another front against Russia. And that would be a very tricky one. Because as you mentioned, Transnistria, which is a place that I'm going to say 98% of Americans could not find on a map. I mean, 4 years ago, I didn't know where it was. It's an area in Moldova that's as far east as you can go. And there's a lot of ethnic Russians that live there. And they've declared autonomy, semi-autonomy, right? There's like 1,500 Russian peacekeepers there. But it is landlocked. It is an area that is stuck between Moldova, right, and Ukraine. And the thing is, when Transnistria originally kind of created itself, they were still dealing with a Ukraine that wasn't openly hostile to Russia, right? So, like, the hope was, in the event of an emergency, all of the ethnic Russians would be able to flee Moldova into Ukraine. But as it looks out, that's no longer going to be a real possibility. In fact, there has been strong implications that Zelensky wants to open a front against Transnistria to kind of force Russia's hand, because it'd be very difficult for Russia to provide any type of, as I can understand, any type of logistical or military support for them, short of doing reckless things, But there has been increased missile strikes in the area, to kind of prevent the Ukrainians from amassing a large enough force to make a move one way or the other. But it's just one more unstable point in this Russian EU game of geopolitics and war. They're trying to keep as low level a war that can be continuously fought as possible on both sides, and that's just weird,
Yeah, and they were trying to deny Transnistria was it the water or the gas? I can't remember. They had the deal there.
I mean, they don't want Transnistria, right? And again, right, this is the hypocrisy of the EU system. Because, I mean, I think about Croatia and Serbia, right? I'm like, oh, Croatia deserves to be its own country. Serbia deserves to be its own country. They voted for independence. Well, so did Transnistria, right? Nobody considers Transnistria a country, So, again, it's only independence when you want to be part of the EU. Then it counts a lot, if they say. Because, again, Turkey's been trying to get into the EU for 40 years with, no real success.
Let's take a look at this, shall we? Because there's a lot going on in Europe, and I'm going to read this for our podcast listeners. The European Union will commit $2 billion to supply Ukraine with drones. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has announced, as the bloc moves to scale up Kyiv's battlefield capacity with unmanned aerial systems. Speaking in Brussels on Tuesday alongside NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, von der Leyen described the commitment as the bloc's most concrete steps yet to strengthen Ukraine's defenses. It seems like no matter what happens, no matter who is elected, no matter what the sentiment of the people is, the United States and Europe, they just dead set on keeping this this war going on to, I guess, destabilize Russia, which still has not bore any fruit. What are your thoughts on this?
So $2 billion is I don't know. It's not an in 2 billion euros. Excuse me, because 2 billion euros is probably worth more than $2 billion right now. Yay, the dollar's never been doing better. So that's what they say. Um, it's interesting to see how years ago the people that talked about this as a proxy war were treated as conspiracy theorists, right? When now we have Ursula von der Leyen, who's out and out saying she's arming Ukraine, right? Why can't we arm Ukraine to vote, right? I thought democracy was the most important thing. Zelensky has been out of constitutional power for close to 2 years, right? If you got all this time to talk about getting in peacekeeping troops and $2 billion for more drones, right? Why don't we let the people of Ukraine have a say as to which way they want to go? We know the way that Zelensky wants to go, but I mean, Zelensky has almost the exact same motivations as Bibi Netanyahu right now, and that is to say, stay in power, right? I mean, every day that there is not an election in Ukraine is one more day that Zelensky has pretty close to absolute power as far as what he can do. But we're not talking about a real government again, right? We're talking about the America First government, about to provide $90 billion worth of aid to NATO, which the United States is part of NATO, so it's a gift to Ukraine. We have $2 billion from the Europeans, and none of this seems to make sense, especially in the backdrop of where is the money coming from, which leaves us back to the overhanging fruit, right, of the 300 billion with the B dollars of sovereign wealth that the EU banks and the American banks, the SWIFT system, is holding. That is Russian sovereign wealth, right? So that's the only place where they can get this money, other than taxing the population, which again they're not really keen to do because most of Europe is not sold on this. This is why, this is one of the many reasons, Alternative for Deutschland, AfD, in Germany is doing so well, right? They're campaigning on, amongst many other things, no longer going to war with Russia, no longer giving all of the government's money to Ukraine, right? So, like, when these things are put up to a vote in the European populations, these things lose, and so where can the money come from? There's only one place where the money is just readily accessible. The problem is that's not just free money, man. It's just not. Like, if you take that $300 billion, which we've talked about on this show several times, it destroys confidence globally in the Western banking system. Because if you take Russia's money, who's to say you won't take Saudi Arabia's money? Who's to say you won't take Qatar's money? Who's to say you won't take Iraq's money? Any of these countries where all of their sovereign wealth is stored in Western banks, which is the trap of putting your sovereign wealth in Western banks to begin with. But this is what it means to de-dollarize, right? This is why people are trying to find ways to extricate. You don't even necessarily have to be anti-American. Many of these countries aren't. India is not anti-American, not by any stretch. America is far more anti-India than India is anti-America. And I would say the same thing about Saudi Arabia. Buddy is a billionaire. He believes in this. MBS believes in money. He believes in wealth, right? He just want to make sure that wealth is his. I can't count on this wealth if I can't count on you not to take this money. And this is the only place that so far the Europeans have been able to find that they can tap. They've been very clever about what they've done so far. Like, oh, we're just taking the interest from the money. The interest isn't guaranteed. You know what I'm saying? All kinds of little banking tricks. But even that's running out, and sooner or later they're gonna have to tap that proper 300 billion, the principal, and it's going to cause an economic huge upheaval, all around the world, and no one really knows where the bottom is on that because it will create a run, and this ain't a run of personal individuals. This will be a country run. You know what I'm saying? Like countries will run to find alternatives to the dollar as soon as this happens, and you don't know how many will, but it's going to be more than one.
And the Trump administration has continued to run the budget up as far as possible, even more so than the early months of the Biden administration. So there is no money involved that can't be that they're not looking at, like, let me get a little piece of this, because the money has to be there. The money has to be part of the equation. And like you're saying, the confidence in the United States is already at a low. And if you end up taking this principle, like you said, that just is why we have all these the BRICS meetings, where they talk about de-dollarizing and all those other things. It comes from things like this, and whether there is a different reserve currency, whether there is a different system other than SWIFT that can be utilized, we'll see. But we definitely know that countries are prioritizing it. And speaking of, we know that this has been something that Zelensky has been after, and that's, again, it's more money for the weapons. And you've seen Donald Trump bulk a little bit, and I've heard so much of this over the last 6 months. Oh, they're tapering down the amount of money that they're sending to Ukraine. Oh, well, even though Trump won't stop the war, at least he's not funding it. But again, you see, aid packages proposed, at least, that are as large, if not larger, than anything the Biden administration has been able to do. And it seems as if, I've been saying this, the Donald Biden, Joe Trump, is it really different? Is there really a change when it comes to policy in Ukraine and Russia? When you see we just talked about the enormous debt that the United States is in, not to mention the suffering of its people, and the incredible wealth gap that exists and continues to grow. But yet we are able to fund these projects like Ukraine, and still funding Holocaust in Palestine, not to mention possible color revolutions in no less than 3 countries, possibly more right now. The money just keeps coming from somewhere, and it keeps going to destabilizing the planet and destabilizing the world. And that's sort of what America is doing and what it does. Just any more thoughts sort of on Zelensky, his seat is as hot as possible,
This is what I would say about that. This is once again the side effects of having an over financialized economy, right? Where most of the income that comes from derivatives and banking tricks and gambling on the stock market, gambling. It's not an economy that's built on building things so much as charging for the things that are built. Like, even if you went to go and buy a car, you have to go and get a loan and all of these different things, and it's not GMC that's giving you the loan, GMAC, right? And so when you see that $2 billion, and again, it's for drones, right? What does that tell you? It tells you drones are something that can be done where you can fire that from somewhere quite far away. You don't even have to be necessarily on the front line for a lot of these drones. They have quite a range. And that tells me, once again, more than any other thing, there are primary failures in the Ukrainian military machine, because this is a land war. Land wars are fought with armies, and armies fight land wars with infantry, okay, and artillery. These are the things that they need. And in 2022, remember, 2023, the United States was running all around the world, bagging and bumming artillery shells from everywhere. They've given that dream up. They know they can't match the Russians in this artillery war. So what have they done? They've reduced it down to human wave tactics, which we're seeing outside of. It's funny that they say it's the Russians, but it's really not the Russians because the Russians are defending right now. The Ukrainians are the ones that are on offense, especially in places like Prokrovsk and Kupiansk, right, where the Russian army is dug in and the Ukrainian army is trying to unseat them from their locations. So you're not seeing even that they are out of people, and so this is why the drones become so important, right? One person, and there's no telling how many drones they can fly. They can fly drones every day. It allows them to project power in a way whereas they normally couldn't. It's a huge force amplifier. The Russians do this as well. They just also do it with dug in troops and artillery, air superiority, all of those other things that you associate with the battlefield. Right now, all Ukraine can offer is drones and human waves, and less human waves because, from an infantry point of view, they're just not. They're undermanned, they're underprepared, and the battle line is being stressed all across the battle line.
What about these Tomahawks that we're hearing Pete Hegseth talk about the president wanting to utilize in Ukraine? We've talked about them before here, but again, do you think that it bears any in any use in a place like Ukraine?
More than a year, okay. Zelensky has been begging for Tomahawks. That was part of his peace plan, which everyone seems to have forgotten about from just 1 year ago. It just shows how short the memory of people are. So, like, there's a train of thought that, these are the Tomahawks he's always been asking for, and they're just now getting ready to give them to him. It's funny because when Trump was running for president, he talked about what a stupid idea this was from the Bidens. Ironically, the only other person in the Biden industry that also felt this way was General, what was his name? The Secretary Lloyd, General Lloyd, right? Who was the Secretary of Defense under Biden, was like, this is not a good idea. Y'all keep doing what you do with your drones, and that's good enough. We're not giving you these, right? Because this has been one of the oldest red lines that the Russians have had since the end of the Cold War. The reason they're fighting in Ukraine all along was so that Ukraine couldn't be used as a missile platform to fire into Russia, which should actually be a very understandable position.
Yeah.
Like,
this is the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? I mean, this is a similar situation. You're putting missiles in an area that can hit major cities in your country.
yeah, and let's be honest. Look, I don't want to ever have to face a Tomahawk. It's a terrifying weapon. But as weapons of war go, it is a bit dated. It's subsonic in a world of hypersonic weapons. It's a cruise weapon, which means it's good. It flies under the radar and such. But, in an era with laser point defense, like, there's real questions as to how much efficacy it's even going to bring to the battlefield. And the thing is, there's no more ambiguity, right? When you start firing a Tomahawk, even in the ways that you can play with some of these, like the ATACMs and such, there's no ambiguity that when a Tomahawk is fired, it's using United States navigation. It's an attack from the United States or NATO in all but name. And who knows how the Russians will respond to that red line. But I assume it won't be passively. And that's the difference, right? Most of the American leadership continues to assume you can push and push and push the Russians' red lines, and there won't be any big complications. But we've already seen the Orishnik deployed in a theater of war. We've seen them now admit that the Orishnik system is inside Belarus, right? So, I mean, it's quite an assumption to assume that this dude who's letting you hit him in the face, is going to let you hit him in the face forever. Sooner or later, the Russians and or possibly the Belarusians will have a serious strike. And that's going to change the calculus.
Another serious strike. Because the Orishnik was a serious strike. I mean, and it's to go to show, like, again, the red lines are going to continue to be moved, and Russia is going to continue to react in the ways that they have in the past with things like Kinjals and Orishniks and these missiles that are far beyond the American capacity right now. And let's not forget that the last time the Orishnik, first time and the last time that the Orishnik has been fired was when the Biden administration was like, okay, let's go ahead and authorize strikes within Russia.
Yeah.
So you're bringing in Tomahawks to hit Russia. I don't see why the same thing wouldn't happen.
So again, for those of you that are relatively new to our broadcast, the Orishnik missile system is a MIRV, which is a kind of weapon that has multiple warheads, right? You fire it. This particular missile goes faster than 10 times faster than the speed of sound. It's flown into the upper atmosphere where it releases and all of the different warheads come down. Now, this one literally, as far as we've seen so far, is just a kinetic weapon, which just means the force of gravity and the propulsion are what it used to do its damage, right? It's not a conventional weapon where, like, it explodes and it does a shockwave. It hits with incredible force and penetrates incredibly deep and disrupts in that way. But the thing about the Orishnik is there's been rumors that there are nuclear variants. So you really never know when an Orishnik is fired what it's going to be. In many ways, this is what we mean when we say, like, old weapon systems like the Tomahawk are kind of outclassed in this capacity. The Tomahawk hasn't been challenged because mostly Americans fire it, right? Nobody wants to fire back at the Americans. You know, that's even the Iranians, you know, it's like, let's hit Qatar. We'll act like, you know, they get the point, right? Like, nobody wants to be the one to straight up fire on the Americans because no one knows what the reaction will be. The only thing you know is it will not be good, you know. But this will put the Tomahawk in a position to be directly challenged by a nation that's probably not just going to take it. And I will also say, because this is worth saying, as I said, the Orishnik can be nuclear tipped. There are rumors. Everyone knows that the Tomahawk can be nuclear tipped. So you just never know what's even coming your way. That's what makes this so dangerous, such a dangerous game.
Yeah. And, you know, Russia has made it, you know, specific, you know, they've been very clear. Any strike on them, you know, it will be the end of Europe and possibly more. And that's really what we're looking at. China said the same thing. And I think countries are really, they know now that if there is no capitulation at this point, you know, they want to grind you down until you are a proxy of themselves, global hegemony. We've talked about this before, and that's why you can't go on what's logical. None of this is logical. None of this is the way that you should go about your business. This is what China understands. We are.
What was the thing that Victor Gao said? China will not strike first, but it will not allow anyone to hit them twice. Like,
yeah.
You know, I mean, these are not small countries that can just be bullied anymore. You know, like that era's gone. You know, that type of super supremacy, hyper supremacy, it died in the 90s.
Yeah, no facts. I want to give a shout out to our podcast listeners. We're available everywhere you find podcasts: Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, the good stuff, InnerCityLeft.com, Fables and Foibles and Other American Sins. New music coming out all the time. Search Amin TMK, Lil Tanky in wherever you find music. And another thing I just wanted to say too, we lost Asada Shakur. You always see me keeping the Asada book up here. I reread it earlier this year. If you were following my Instagram stories, I was posting a lot of excerpts and talking a little bit about her. So, you know, her death, of course, is painful to many. It hit me extra hard just because I was kind of heavy on Asada at the time. You know, and again, I just think it's important to acknowledge that she's one of the most important Americans of the 20th century. It's important for you to know who she is and, you know, how she stood on business and those things. You know, and of course, I'll See You in Valhalla brother had a statement he had to say, oh, she's a bad person. She killed a cop and blah, blah, blah. We all know that she was framed, not to mention, you know, the prosecution even admitted that she would not be able to shoot the police officer in her condition. So regardless of whatever they say and sort of this response to Asada Shakur, you know, that she was real and she stood on business and she cared about the people very deeply. And it should remind you that nothing has changed. The violence and racism that exists within the United States has not fallen away or taken a step back. It is ever prevalent. And someone like Asada Shakur, who was wrongly targeted, the Black Panthers that were wrongly targeted, we have as much historical evidence as you can on the subject, still are trying to be vilified, you know, by these people.
To this day.
Yeah, to this day.
And, you know, and these are the things I think about, right, when we talk about what administrative and real power looks like. When people are on there canceling campaigns, canceling individuals. This is what systemic power looks like. This is a man that wasn't even alive when any of these things happened. And he's speaking about these things absolutely, right? Like, when you're supposed to be the chief law enforcement official, and there should be the presumption of innocence until guilt. You know what I'm saying? She is alleged. Like, why can't these people use words like alleged? She is alleged to have, right?
They'll catch somebody shooting their whole family and shooting people up, and they'll still say, oh, the suspect.
The suspect. No, I thought it was
I think it was him.
You know? Yeah, you know? So that's where we at on that. But, you know, man, I will say this. Everybody with their little crocodile tears on Asada right now, man, if you voted for Kamala, you should pipe down.
Pipe down.
Because the politics of Asada Shakur and the politics of Kamala Harris are 100% incompatible.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Listening to there, you know, shout out to everybody. Shout out to our patrons. Shout out to our subscribers. We're getting close to 800 subscribers. Send it to your friends. You know what's up. For Mojo Little Tanky Sumler, I'm Amin TMK. This is the Inner City Left broadcast. Peace.
System riding to the core. Yeah. Reppin' in the city left.